Good morning to all. How are you? Online students, I hope you can hear me. Before studying the evolution of India's foreign policy, it is necessary to know some foundational aspects of IR. Right? So first of all, what we do is, we will study the meaning of international relations and the evolution, the origin and evolution of international relations. And there are few important schools of thought with respect to IR. And after that, we will study some important concepts, terms, etc. Then only we will move to evolution of India's foreign policy. In evolution, first we will study what is the meaning of foreign policy. Then we will study the principles of India's foreign policy. Then we will study the objectives of Indian foreign policy. Then we will study the determinants of India's foreign policy. Right? Then we will have an assessment of the India's foreign policy, achievements and challenges, etc. So let us begin with the meaning of the term international relations. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by the term international relations? Anybody? What is the meaning of international relations?
Relation between two states or nations in terms of trade, defense, and other
Okay.
affecting them.
Anything else? Anything else? There are multiple perspectives on the meaning of IR. I will be using the word IR instead of international relations. Fine. One group of people say that this IR is interaction among states. Okay. What is the meaning of the word state? State? How many of you attended the Polity 100 topic program first class, where I explained the meaning of state? I explained the various characteristics of state.
Sovereign territorial entity.
Then, for the purpose of our discussion, for the purpose of our foundation batch, we will be using the terms state, nation, country interchangeably. What I am trying to say, state, nation, country or nation state interchangeably, although there are some differences among these terms. So whenever I am using the word country, nation, state, it means in the context of India. India is a country, India is a state, India is a nation state, India is a state. USA is a state, USA is a nation, USA is a country, USA is a nation state. When we study this evolution, origin and evolution, then you will understand the meaning of this word nation state. But for the time being, understand that all these terms are used interchangeably. How many of you are having political science optional? Anybody? Your optional? Sociology. History. Sociology. Geography. Public administration. We will be using these terms interchangeably. International relations is a relation between states. This state is not state in the context of province. Kerala state, Tamil Nadu state, Uttar Pradesh state, no. This state is equivalent to nation, country. So international relation is the relation between countries, relation between nations, relation between states, or relation between nation states. So IR is the engagement or association among nations. This is one view, very simple way of looking at international relations. Relations, international. International means between nations. So at least two nations should be there. So relationship between nations is international relation, or engagement among nations is international relation. Association among nations is international relation. But there are another group of people who say that international relation is a struggle for power. International relation is a struggle for power. Because nations interact among each other. Nations have relationship with each other for a purpose, and that purpose is power maximization. You need to keep writing. There are few things which I will dictate, right? Then it is easy for you, but in general, whatever I speak, you should write, keep on writing. Our class is for generally for 15 to 16, right? So if I start dictating everything, then this will not get over. I'll speak slowly, you keep on writing. Whatever doubts you can ask me in between, no problem. Right? We will cover all the important areas. Don't worry. Right? If required, we'll take extra classes, we'll prepone the time, we'll extend the time, don't worry. So everything will be covered, including current affairs. We'll also provide you some material, extra material. But the point is that you should write. I speak very slowly. We'll follow a structured pattern like this. Right? So we are discussing the meaning of international relation. One meaning is very simplistic meaning, that is simple meaning. Interaction among nation states, engagement among nation states, association among countries. That's one way of looking at it. Another group of scholars, or another way of looking at IR, or another meaning of IR is, it is a struggle for power. International relation is a struggle for power. Countries interact among each other for power maximization. So international relation is a mechanism for maximizing power. When we progress further, right, through our lecture, this class and other class, you will understand this meaning of power, etc., etc. Because there are multiple variants of relation. The way the countries relate to each other or engage with each other are multiple. It can be political engagement, it can be economic, it can be trade, it can be financial, it can be security, it can be defense. All these things will become clear, but it is necessary that you should have a foundational knowledge of this subject. And one thing I want to tell you that we will not be dealing with international relation from the point of view of what? Political science. The way international relation is taught in political science, the fundamental difference between that teaching and this teaching is we will not be dealing with various thinkers and their theories, etc. So our study will be limited to general studies perspective. How many of you have seen previous year's question papers of IR? Go home and find out, at least 10 years, right? Then you will understand the nature of questions which are being asked. How many of you attended the first class which I took? Right, there we show you the kind of questions asked, right? So that is the level of question which are being asked. But it will be different in the context of political science because it's an optional subject where you will have a lot of thinkers, theories, etc., etc. We are not concerned with that, right? Political science and IR is specialized study of international relation. We will be having a generalized study of IR, but the point of view of examination. Clear? Now I am saying one is engagement, association. Another way of looking at it is power maximization. This international relation, people engage with each other for power maximization. International relation is an instrument for power maximization. International relation is a mechanism through which nations struggle for power, acquisition of power. There is another view of IR. International relation is a system of peaceful communication among nations. Third view is system of peaceful communication. System of peaceful communication. Nations relate to each other, engage with each other to develop or to have proper, streamlined, systematic communication. This is the reason why countries engage with each other. International relation is a system of peaceful communication. You know that in the context of India, we have multiple channels of communication. Prime ministerial, summit level, bilateral. Even within bilateral, we have multiple defense, security based communication, multiple channels of communication, diplomacy, the entire IFS, that Indian Foreign Service. Indian Foreign Service is what? What is their job? To communicate with outside nations, isn't it? So, international relation is a system of peaceful communication. These three are three important meanings of international relation. One is international relation means engagement among nations or association among nations. Second is international relation is a struggle for power. Third one is international relation is a system of peaceful communication. Now, you tell me which one of this is appropriate or which can be accepted as the proper meaning of IR. All of them. There cannot be one definition, right? Ukraine-Russia war, for what? Israel-Palestine war, for what? Power maximization. The USA trying to contain Chinese rise, for what? Power maximization. We'll study all these things, don't worry. Right? But the point is that here, we will study two views of IR in the sense that, let me ask you one thing. We discussed that it's engagement between nations, association among nations, etc., etc. Now, let me ask you one thing. This relation between nations, is it only through government or there are multiple other agencies? India's relation with, let's say, USA. If the government of India is the only actor through which this relation is conducted, or there are multiple other groups, agencies, etc. What do you think? Multiple? Like? It can be through business organization. It can be through civil society. It can be through sports body. Right? Financial institutions. It can be cultural organization. It can be universities, academia. Multiple. Not only that, if I say international relation is not only limited to interaction among nations, there are multiple other organizations also. Let me ask you one thing. India's relation with UN or G20 or NATO or SAARC, can you say that these are also part of international relations? Why so? Because these are international organizations or regional organizations where nations come together and discuss and try to solve their problems. The point I am trying to make is this. International relations can be between nations, 1, 2, 3, or international relations can be conducted within organizational level, that is UN, the SAARC and G20, etc. IR can be conducted through government to government or can be through multiple other agencies. But the traditional view of international relation, the traditional view of IR, two views of international relation. Number one is traditional view. Number two is contemporary view. The traditional view of IR says international relation mean relation between governments. So, government to government relation. Traditional view of international relation says that international relation mean government to government relation. Which means this view excludes various other dimensions of international relation. Government to government means the government of India and government of USA. It says that this government is the most important or critical part of international relation. It ignores other entities or agencies' role in international relation. Are you understanding what I am trying to say? I am simply saying that the traditional view, which means the classical view of international relation, says that international relation means government to government relation or state to state relation. State in the sense government. Here we are using it. State to state. So this view excludes the role, responsibility, importance, significance of various other agencies like this academia, civil society, business, cultural organization, people to people contact, etc. Do you think that this view is acceptable? Is this view acceptable or not? No. It is not acceptable. You see that whenever the Prime Minister goes abroad, he also carries what? Business delegation. Isn't it? Whenever other dignitaries, the Prime Minister of France or let's say President of USA, etc., when they come to India, they also carry them. So it is not only government. Isn't it? So the traditional view of international relation says that government to government is international relation. Government is the most important, the primary actor, which means it ignores, this view ignores other agencies, entities and their role in international relation. We will study later something called diplomacy. Track 1 diplomacy, track 2 diplomacy, track 3, track 1.5, etc. There you will understand the importance of what I am trying to say, the importance of other entities. In traditional viewpoint of international relation, what will be the role of diplomats? Diplomats in the sense that, let's say the Indian Foreign Service in Indian context. These individuals or these people will be the most important mechanism through which diplomacy or international relation is conducted. For the time being, understand, diplomacy is the mechanism through which foreign policy is implemented. For the time being, understand, diplomacy means, diplomacy is the, you need to keep writing down. If you don't write, then what will happen? You will not be able to recollect them. Every class is interlinked. Every class is interlinked. If you do not understand one class, then it will be very difficult to catch up with the other class. Right? Diplomacy is the mechanism through which foreign policy is implemented. Foreign policy is a set of principles, norms, and objectives concerning external relations of a nation. Foreign policy set of principles, norms, interest concerning external relations of a nation. In other words, foreign policy is the external policy of a nation. Policy. In other words, Foreign policy is the policy of the government dealing with external affairs. In Indian context, the Ministry of External Affairs is having the responsibility to implement the foreign policy of the country. So, in the traditional view of international relation, the officers of Indian Foreign Service, which is a part of your UPSC service, this examination, Indian Foreign Service officers, they are the most important part through which this is implemented. But what we are trying to say that this view is not an appropriate view. This view is not an appropriate view. That is why this contemporary view of international relation is important. The contemporary view of international relations says that although the state or government is an important factor in international relation, the role and responsibilities and significance of other agencies, entities, groups, etc. cannot be excluded. Although the state or the government is an important factor in international relation, the role, responsibility and significance of other agencies, entities or groups, etc. cannot be excluded. What does it mean? It says that in today, the international relation is not conducted not by the government alone. In fact, there are multiple other agencies, groups, institutions, organizations. Like I mentioned, cultural organization, academic organization, business organization. You see, there is in India something called FICCI, there is NASSCOM, isn't it? There is India-USA Business Council, India-USA Business Council, similarly India-UK Business Council. So, business to business relation, industry to industry relation, media to media relation, academic to academic relation, cultural, religious organization relation. For these agencies, groups, whether they are religious, cultural, media, or the civil society, NGOs, academic organization, university, business organization, etc., are very important critical part of international relation. Which means it is not only this IFS officers or the diplomats or the government and their agencies. These institutions, these organizations have very important role in international relations. You must have heard about this organization known as Transparency International. Yes or no? Yes or no? No? How many of you are not reading newspapers? Today onwards you should read newspaper every day, until unless your name is not there in the list. After that, not necessary. Necessary to read. In the first class I told you that international relation is current affairs. plus that current affairs you will understand and you will be able to answer the question in the mains as well as PT only when your foundation is strong. International relations is a dynamic subject. As we are speaking, a lot of things are happening, isn't it? A lot of things will happen even after our batch gets over. But because the IR is current affairs in the sense that questions in mains examination as well as PT and in the interview are generally based on this current affairs. So current affairs newspaper is very important. The Hindu should read, right? Or Express, whatever that might be, whichever. If you don't like the Hindu, you can read Express. But one newspaper should be read properly, right? Very important, because it will help in the examination and also to help better understand this lecture. What I am trying to say is that these NGOs, global NGOs like Transparency International, Oxfam, Amnesty International, Greenpeace. Have you studied about this organization IUCN, International Union for Conservation for Nature? Have you studied about WWF, World Wildlife Fund? These are what? Non-governmental organizations. Do you think that these organizations and the organization which you mentioned, Oxfam and others, have a significant role in this international relations? Yes or no? Absolutely. So, this contemporary view says not only the government, there are significant other players in international relations which influence the global affairs, which influence the way international relations is conducted. COP28 recently happened. When this meeting happens, there are these NGOs, reputed NGOs, which are also being called in for meeting, and they also participate. So they also participate and they also influence these decisions. Not only that, this view says that there is another group of institutions which are also having significant importance apart from the government. What are they? These are international organizations. Like I mentioned, United Nations, keep writing. If you don't write, then what will happen? I am speaking very slowly, you should write. The class is only for 2.5 hours. In the examination hall, you have 3 hours, mains examination should write. Right? The pace at which you write here is not the pace at which you write in the examination hall. The pace will be very high. So make use of this practice. I am speaking very slowly, keep writing. Whatever doubts you can ask me, not a problem. If you say that, if you see, sir please repeat, then I will repeat. I am not teaching from any book, right? So keep writing. These notes will help you in revision also. You cannot go back to a textbook before the examination. These notes will help you. Notes are the best friends for UPSC aspirants. A well-made, well-structured note. Keep writing. International organizations like the United Nations, like the WTO, like the G20, etc., also play a significant role in international relations. Here, governments. Here, not only government, non-governmental organizations, or we can call them non-state organizations. Or non-state actors. What is the meaning of non-state actor? What is the meaning of non-state? Non-state actors, the meaning should be looked into context. When the non-state actor is used in the context of terrorism, crime, etc., then there is a terrorist, crime syndicate, etc. When non-state actors is used in the context of government, governance, polity, international relation, then they are those agencies, organizations which are not part of the government. So non-state actor here means cultural organizations, business organization, civil society organization, academia. Clear? So this contemporary view of international relations says non-state actors are significant, critical in conducting international relations. It's not only the government. Not only that, international relations is not government to government. This international relations also happen in international organizations like United Nations, like WTO. So we said relation between nations is international relation. What we are here saying, not only that, there are global organizations, global institutions, international organizations where this international relation is conducted. Are you with me till now or not? Any doubt you have what I am trying to say? The fundamental idea is this. The way of looking at the international relation is two. Number one is traditional view of looking at it. Number view is contemporary. Contemporary means what is going on. Contemporary. Which view is more appropriate according to you? This view is more appropriate because this view excludes the current reality. It only keeps government. But as we know, it is not only government. Although government is an important actor, no problem. But there are multiple other agencies like these cultural organizations, or put it differently, non-state actors are important. India-Pakistan relation, there is a problem of terrorism. So Pakistan's non-state actors are influencing the international relation between India and Pakistan. Yes or no? So you can add, if you want, the terrorist organizations or the criminal organization or organized crime syndicate. What's influencing? In other words, the contemporary view of international relation talks about a multi-dimensional view of IR. This is the conclusion, multi-dimensional view. In other words, international relation today is conducted through multiple channels. Multi-dimensional, multiple channels, multi-pronged approach. Multi-pronged approach. Today, international relation reflects a cobweb. Simply means multiple channels of interaction. Means multiple channels of interaction or association or communication or engagement, cobweb. Government to government is happening, business to business is happening, cultural to cultural is happening, film to film, what do you say? Film industry, business to business, religious organizations, academic conferences, professional organization like this Bar Council of India, like this CA, professional organizations. Multi-dimensional, multi-pronged, multiple mechanisms are there. International organization, regional organization, by it's like a complicated, complex system which we have at this point in time. Cobweb phenomena of international relation. So what we are having today is this contemporary view of IR, which says that the international relation today is not a simple government to government relation. It is a complex multidimensional phenomena reflecting a cobweb, which essentially means that a multidimensional approach to international relation, where state and non-state actors are crucial elements in conducting international relation. Are you understanding what I am trying to say? So which is more appropriate? This one is more appropriate. We will study, when we study bilateral relation, when we study India, West Asia, India, Africa, etc., right? When we study various international organizations, the UN, etc., you will understand all these things, what I am trying to say. Now we are going to see this one, origin and evolution of international relations. Let me ask you one thing. This relation between nations, or relation between earlier what we call these empires or kingdoms, etc., were there any contact between these countries or kingdoms? Were there any contacts between the ancient kingdoms, monarchies, empires, etc., or were they isolated? There were contacts. What type of contacts? Trade, tourism, religious linkages, conquest, isn't it? One example, you know, Ashoka sent his emissaries for Buddhism, isn't it? You also know that how Mughals came to India. You also know that how Greek, Alexander and others came to India in the context of India. You also know that how the French, Portuguese and the British came to India as traders, etc. You also know that many religious scholars came to India to study. You also know that Marco Polo came, Fahian, etc., etc. The point I am trying to make is that the relation or interaction among these nations or the erstwhile kingdoms existed, isn't it? So the relation among countries or kingdoms or empires existed from time immemorial. When there is recorded history of human civilization, international relation when there is recorded history of human, since the recorded history of human civilization, international relations started. Yes or no? Since the recorded history of human civilization, international relations started. But let me ask you one thing. The kind we see at today or in contemporary period, can we see this in this ancient period? In other words, what has been the nature of IR in ancient period? Systematic or ad hoc or structured or unstructured?
Structured and ad hoc according to the context of that time.
The way we see international relation today, through organizations, through government to government, through diplomacy, etc., are not prevalent then. So their international relation was limited in scope, unstructured, ad hoc, not systematic. Yes or no? So what I am trying to say is that although international relation as an activity existed from recorded human history, but it was not structured, systematic, it was ad hoc, limited in scope. But later this system changed. This system changed when the system changed in 17th century. That is what we are going to see, origin and evolution. The way we know IR began in 1648. International relation, what we see or what we understand today as IR, began in 1648. Although there were international relations, but it was not systematic, but was very limited in scope. And the international relation of earlier ancient period did not result into any positive outcome. The way we understand IR today began in this year 1648. Now, what is the importance of this year 1648? This 1648 year is important for Westphalian Treaty. Westphalia. Westphalia is a region in Germany. Before this treaty, the entire Europe was in war. There has been 30 years war, there has been 80 years war, etc., which resulted into large scale damage, destruction, death, etc. So those countries decided that we should end this war. And there should be peace in Europe. So they assembled in the Westphalian city of Germany. The major countries, major empires or states came together and decided that we should we should conclude a treaty and end this war, end this bloodshed. But the significance of this treaty is not only that ending of the war, but the significance of the treaty or significance of Westphalia is that this treaty resulted into the concept of nation state. This treaty resulted in the concept of nation state. What is the meaning of word state? State is an entity having four characteristics. State is an entity having four characteristics: sovereignty, territory, population, and government. One of the major reasons for those 30 years and 80 years war was that what? It was lack of respect for territorial integrity of the country. Lack of respect for territorial integrity. Russia is attacking Ukraine. Does Russia respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine? Yes or no? China entered into India, Galwan, although the government of India does not agree in this statement, but anyway, for the time being, let us see. 1952, let's take 1952. 1952 war, India-China. China entered into India, so violated territorial integrity. So violation of territorial integrity is one of the major reasons for war. The 30 years of war and 80 years of war was majorly because of the violation of territorial integrity. Why? International relation is a struggle for power. I am a state. I want to acquire more territory. So, war. So, let me ask you another question. If states or countries or nations, if they respect territorial integrity of each other, then there will be less chance of war or higher chance of war? Less chance of war. Territory. Respect for territorial integrity. Principle accepted in Westphalia Treaty. One important principle came from Westphalia is respect for territorial integrity. If one country meddles in the affairs of another country, will there be sovereignty? What is the meaning of the word sovereignty? Sovereignty means internally independent, externally independent. Sovereignty means internally independent, externally independent, which means within the territory of my country or my region, the government or the people will have supreme power. Others will not do anything. You see, this period is also a period of what? Enmity between Christianity, enmity between sects in Christianity. How many of you know about this? Protestantism, sociology, you know this? Optional having sociology, Protestantism, Catholicism. Christianity is two major sects, Protestant and Catholics. Earlier Catholics, but later another group, Protestantism, moved out of this Catholic control. So there was war between or enmity, hostility between these two. Roman Empire was there at that point in time. Roman was Catholic. But in Europe, including Germany and others, Christian Protestantism was also prevalent. But Roman Catholics controlled church said that those individuals practicing Protestantism are not Christians. In other words, they prevented this Protestant faith individuals from practicing their religion, which resulted into war. So in this region, in my country, right, I am the king and there is Protestant people. But the Pope, Roman Empire and the Pope was the, even today, is the highest spiritual or religious head of Christianity, especially Roman Catholics. So Pope says, do not allow the Protestants to practice their religion because they are heretic. Heretic means anti-Christian, what are the term, right? But the country wants, the king and the government wants that the people within my territory should be having the freedom to practice their religion. But other institutions, other nations are saying do not do. Do not permit it. So do you think that these nations and institutions are interfering in the domestic affairs? Are you understanding what I am trying to say? Yes or no? So this interference violates internal independence. So, but if there is sovereignty, if there is recognition of sovereignty, then this interference will not be there. Yes or no? So what I am trying to say, apart from respect for territorial integrity, another principle that came from this Westphalian Treaty is respect for sovereignty. Now, I am a country. I have some problem with neighboring country. I want to peacefully resolve this issue with the neighboring country. But other nations are saying, no, do not resolve this. Or you will do what I will say. So my relation with the other country is also being dictated by another nation or another group of institutions. So do you think that this violates external sovereignty? Isn't it? So my freedom to conduct foreign affairs, external affairs, or implement foreign policy is being restricted by other countries and other nations and other institutions. So my external sovereignty is also affected. So another principle that came from this is independence of foreign policy. Another principle that came from this principle is equality among nations. Whether you are big, whether you are small, does not matter. Because you have sovereignty. You are equal. So, equality among nations. Another principle that came from equality among nations. Whether the country is militarily superior, does not matter. Whether you have small territory, population small, does not matter. Every country is independent. So, equality among nations. If there is equality, then big country cannot bully the small country. Another principle that came is equality among nations. It is through this nation-state concept all these principles are derived. I'll explain what is this nation. Wait for some time. State is an entity which has 4 essential characteristics which are indivisible: territory, sovereignty, government, and population. India is a state because India is a government. India has a population. India has a defined territory, and there is sovereignty within India. Which means all these principles will be applicable to India. Respect for sovereignty, integrity, independent foreign policy, equality among the nations. Yes. Not only for India, for any other country. And if nations respect these, principles, then there will be very less chance for war. If China respects the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Taiwan, the problem which we are seeing will not happen. If Russia respected these principles, this would not have happened. What about Second World War? Did Hitler respected the principle? Did Mussolini respect? No. But had they respected, war would not have been there. So in 1648, they decided that the major problem resulting into this endless war is because of violation of these principles. And this principle can be implemented only when we have a defined system known as a state, a defined entity. What happened was, earlier in Europe, there were many empires. Let me ask you one thing. Mughal, was it a state or an empire? Mughal Empire, Ashokan Empire, Mauryan Empire. So the way we know countries today was not the same earlier. It was state, Roman Empire. If you study history, then you know that one of the major reasons for First World War was what? The control of Austrian Empire. Austrian Empire on Serbia, etc., etc. Problem is that this word empire means controlling large areas or large regions. An empire is run by a monarch, which means the areas under the control of empire are depending upon this monarch. Roman Empire, Rome was the seat of power, and all those areas, regions under Roman Empire was controlled by Roman. Ottoman Empire, must have read about Ottoman Empire. So the regions under Ottoman Empire was controlled by Ottoman. But it is possible that although the central seat of power in the context of Rome or in the context of Ottoman, the central seat of power will have a different kind of religion or language or culture which are different from others. Like I mentioned, Roman Empire, Catholic. But under the control of Roman Empire, there were multiple regions which spoke different languages, which practiced different religion, and they wanted to become independent. So the control of empire then in Europe was restricted. Many nations got independence. I'll give an example. There was an empire of Spanish Empire. Then Spanish Empire controlled Netherlands, the Dutch-speaking people. But in Spain, the language was Spanish. In Netherlands, language was Dutch. So difference. The Dutch-speaking area under the Spanish Empire wanted to be an independent country. They want to become a state. This state having a government, having a sovereignty, having territorial integrity, and having the people living there. Independent country. If Westphalia resulted into this, the control of Spanish Empire on Dutch-speaking people ended. Dutch became an independent country. It became a state. So from empire, states began to emerge. States began to emerge. Do we have an empire today? No. What we have is nation states, or let's say we have states. State and nation state are used interchangeably, but there is a fundamental difference. This nation, what is the meaning of this word nation? Nation means a group of people having a common identity. Nation means a group of people or a collectivity of people having common identity. This identity can be based on history, based on religion, based on language, based on ideology, based on culture, ethnicity, race, etc., etc. The Dutch independent nation, can we call it a nation state? Why? Because language was the essence of forming that nation. Pakistan, religion was the basis. The disintegration of USSR in 1991 and formation of 11 republics. Nationality. Kazakhstan, give me some example. Kazakhstan, earlier, as you know, the USSR was the country, but in 1991, December, disintegrated. One country became Russia, and after that, from USSR, multiple independent countries started forming. The Central Asian countries, what we know today. How many Central Asian countries are there? 5. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzstan. These were part of the erstwhile USSR, which disintegrated in 1991. So, from this USSR, these countries formed. Kazakh, ethnicity. Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Uzbek, these are ethnicity, race, nation. You must have studied about in history, nation building in India. What Gandhi did, Gandhi forged this unity. You must have also read about scholars and commentators saying that India is not a nation. The freedom struggle forged the idea of nation, idea of India. French nation, France, French language. China, Chinese language or communism became the basis, ideology. So when the word nation is used, the nation indicates unity or a unified identity based on history, culture, language, etc., etc. So the nation state or the state as we know today emerged from Westphalia because it recognized the independence of countries. It provided opportunity for communities to form their own government, their own nation. It upheld the principles. It formed the concept of state. And from state, these principles are derived. Adopting these principles, applying these principles will mean what? Will mean no domination of one country over the other. Independent existence of nations. Less chances for conflict. Less chances for war. More peace. Yes or no? But this order is known as Westphalian order. The world order, which is established through Westphalian Treaty, is known as Westphalian Order. Order means global order. Global order means the way international relation is conducted. How it would have been conducted in general if it was in this Westphalian world order? Negotiation, diplomacy, discussion, less war, more peace. Although it's true that there have been multiple wars, etc., but theoretically speaking, foreign policy, diplomacy became an instrument of international relation, structured, because there is independent of foreign policy. So foreign policy began to be formulated properly. Any problem? Foreign policy, diplomacy, diplomats, systematic approach to international relation. Less scope of war means more peace building. Bilateral relation, multilateral relations, international organizations began to emerge. But however, this world order, this respect for this Westphalian principle were undermined in Second World War. We are dealing with first phase of evolution of IAS. This is first phase. What we had from 1648 to beginning of World War II. Because World War II undermined all this. Respect for territorial integrity violated, sovereignty violated, isn't it? Equality violated, independent foreign policy violated, everything violated. So the Westphalian world order crumbled. Westphalian world order. What happened? Ask me. First phase of international relation. We are dealing with evolution also. So this is first phase of international relation, which was speaking. First phase of international relation. First phase of IR is 1648 to World War II. Because once the World War started, this entire system crumbled down. War, violence, destruction, annexation, violation of territorial integrity, etc. Equality among nations undermined. After this, after the end of World War, another phase began in international relation. That second phase is end of World War II till end of Cold War. This World War ended in which year? 1945? When the World War ended, instead of returning to the Westphalian principles of equality, respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, etc., the world became bipolar. Two countries emerged as the most powerful nation on earth, USSR and USA. USSR and USA. USSR led the communist bloc. Which bloc? Communist bloc. And USA led the capitalist bloc. How many of you attended the first class of Polity and Entropy program? The video is available in YouTube also. You can watch it. I have explained communism, capitalism, socialism, etc., etc. So, communist bloc led by USSR. Another bloc led by USA. These two countries and their blocs emerged as the most powerful in international affairs. The control of these two countries or blocs over the world affairs resulted into bipolarity. Bipolarity. Polarity means distribution of power in IR. Polarity means distribution of power. There are majorly three types of polarity. Number one, three types of polarity. Number one, unipolarity or unipolar. Number two is this bipolar. Number three is multipolar. Unipolar means the power is concentrated in one country. Bipolar means power is concentrated in two countries. Multipolar means power is dispersed, disaggregated, distributed. The Westphalian system was a multipolar world order. But after the end of Second World War, the world became bipolar because these two countries controlled the affairs of the states. They interfered in the domestic affairs. They dictated the foreign affairs. Independence of nations, sovereign equality of nations became only a myth. These countries controlled other countries in the world. This period also resulted into a concept known as satellite state. This period also resulted into a concept known as satellite state. What is satellite state? Earth is a satellite of? Earth is a satellite of? Earth, the planet Earth is a satellite of? अरे किसका सैटेलाइट है? सन, मून, सन ना? हाँ, and moon is the satellite of Earth. This is sun. This is Earth. Sun, Earth, Moon. Earth is satellite of Sun. Moon is satellite of Earth. Similarly, in bipolarity, USA. These are countries, satellite countries. Like the Earth revolves around Sun, like the Moon revolves around the Earth, these countries revolve around USA, which means USA dominate the affairs of these nations, satellite states. So whether satellite states have real independent foreign policy, whether they can exercise their sovereignty, no. Why? Because they are controlled by USA and USSR. But in between this, within this period, there were a group of countries who were determined to not to be a part of either these two blocks. A group of countries led by India and others. These group of countries are known as non-aligned countries. What kind of countries? Non-aligned nations. Non-aligned. Countries can be aligned to USSR, countries can be aligned to USA, but there are a group of countries who do not want to be aligned, who do not want to be satellite states, who wanted to remain independent and to have effective independent foreign policy. These countries are known as non-aligned nations. We will study now later. Non-aligned nations. These nations developed a movement or an organization known as Non-Aligned Movement, NAM. NAM. Read newspaper. Non-Aligned Movement. This period or phase is also known as Cold War period. Cold War. What is Cold War? Cold War is a period of extensive rivalry between the USSR and USA. A period of hostile relation. Keep writing. A period of hostile relations. A period of hostile relation between USSR and USA. Because both these countries wanted to emerge as the sole superpower. The sole superpower. And to undermine the dominance of other. Although there was no actual war, but during this period, the relation between these two blocks have been highly conflictual. Although there was no actual war, but the relations have been highly hostile or conflictual. In order to counter the influence of USSR, USA and allies formed NATO in 1949. Formed NATO. NATO means, what is full form? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO. To contain or limit the influence of what? USSR. In order to counter the influence of USA, USSR and others formed another grouping known as Warsaw Pact or Warsaw Grouping. W-A-R-S-A-W, Warsaw. W-A-R-S-A-W, Warsaw. Warsaw is the capital of Poland. Warsaw Pact. 1949. This is 1955. Warsaw 1955. This period also saw what? Escalation of arms race. Nuclear weapons building. Arms race, weapon building, and development of large number of WMD. WMD means weapons for mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction, WMD, all capital, WMD. Third phase of IR, end of Cold War till 2010. End of Cold War. Cold War ended in 1991 with the disintegration of USSR. Now, disintegration of USSR resulted into what? There were two powers, USA and USSR. Now, USSR gone. Now, who will remain? USA. USA became the sole superpower, or in other words, the world became unipolar. World became unipolar. Are you understanding? Is there any problem? Tell me. Is there any problem? No problem? Very good. Because of the disintegration of USSR, USA emerged as the sole superpower. Superpower means a country, write down. Superpower is a country who has the capacity to take any decision or action at any time, anywhere, without being influenced or limited or restricted by any other country. Superpower. Because of disintegration, USA became the superpower. The world became unipolar, which means the power in international system came to be concentrated in the hands of USA. Yes or no? This period also saw, I am trying to write down some developments which happened in this period. Which period? End of Cold War. When Cold War ended? 1991 till 2010. So this is the period which we are going to see, and this is the period where the USA was the sole superpower, which means it could have done anything.
Power in internal system, like
International system, not internal. Which means if USA has power, whatever it says, other countries will obey. Whatever USA say will be the word of the United Nations. This way, international system. Power can be there, power can be in classroom, power can be in family, power can be in school, power can be in community, power can be in government. Similarly, power can be in the international system, the global power. There is a word, geopolitics, we'll see that later, don't worry. Unipolar. In a unipolar world, USA became the sole superpower. This is a period of globalization. This is a period of IMF and World Bank and WTO controlling the international economic, trade and financial system. This is a period of Iraq war, Afghanistan intervention, by USA. This is the period where USA dictated the global affairs. In other words, USA became, I'll write here, global police or world police. What are the, right? World police. This is also a period, I am here, ascendancy of G7. Globalization advocate free trade. Free trade is advocated by capitalism. Because of the communist control over a section of country, the free trade was not possible. But once USSR disintegrated, then the resistance, the bloc was no longer there. So, free trade became possible. Freedom of trade, free trade. Development of private sector. Because in communist system, the government is the controller of economy. Very less scope for private sector. But when the communist system collapsed, the capitalist system led by the USA became prominent. So capitalism require what? More markets. So one of the essential aspects of capitalism is free trade. Freedom of trade, more markets. Why do you think the Britishers came to India? For trade? Globalization emerged in 1990s as a force of free trade, freedom of movement of people, free exchange of ideas. Early 1990s. Early 1990s. Let me ask you one thing. You must have heard about something called LPG. Have you? What is this LPG? When did India adopt this strategy? 1991. What is this G? Globalization. So this period? What I am trying to say, these are interlinked. What is the meaning of liberalization? Liberalizing the economy, which means restricting, removing the controls of the government on the economic system. When controls are removed, there will be more freedom for the private sector. Capital can move freely. Investment can be free. Trade can be free. Market will have more freedom. The goods of one country can be exported, imported into other country. But earlier communist system controlled. So the capitalist, the entry of capitalist system or capital economies or capital goods and services to these markets were restricted. So, but once communist ideology ended, globalization, free trade started moving not only from the Western dominated bloc but also to other nations like India and others. So, in the context, India adopted this LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. IMF and World Bank, although these were after the these institutions were set up after the Second World War, because of the IMF and World Bank was controlled by USA and they adopt this capitalist approach, the USSR-led bloc prevented their hegemony or dominance. Now the bloc ended, hence their dominance expanded. Remember one thing, before the disintegration of USSR, the USSR helped India in economic ways, finance, arms, etc., etc. But now the USSR disintegrated, which means they cannot help us. So India had to find out multiple other ways for growth, development, poverty alleviation, etc. And India, on the one hand, India adopted this approach of LPG. On the other, India approached IMF and World Bank for finance, fund, technology, etc., etc. IMF and World Bank, they have a lot of money, but because of their ideologies, capitalistic and controlled by US and others, they imposed conditionalities on countries, which means if you want money, you should do this. Sri Lanka, Asian crisis, IMF provided money and IMF provided money with conditionality, conditions. So when there are conditions, then these organizations will control your affairs, both internal as well as external. Because these are controlled by USA, ultimately USA controls. Controlling, yes, that is what I have written here, controlling the international financial economic system. Whether it is in Latin America, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in Asia, etc. Iraq war, because of the unipolarity. USA invaded Iraq in late 1990s. Invaded Iraq. Iraq was invaded by USA. Why? According to USA, Iraq had WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam Hussein, the then leader of Iraq, was using these WMDs against his own people. Saddam Hussein, according to USA, was a dictator. So where there is dictatorship, there cannot be any democracy. Where there is no democracy, there is no respect for human rights. There is no freedom. So USA, being a democratic nation, decided to export democracy. Export democracy. Export democracy through war. Export democracy through regime change. Export democracy through regime change. Export democracy through regime change. Remember, this 1999 war or invasion of Iraq was not supported by UNSC, United Nations Security Council, which we'll study later. Don't worry. For the time being, understand that the decision was a unilateral decision taken by USA and its allies, although not supported by the United Nations. Superpower, any decision, any action, anywhere, not controlled by others, invaded. Another, Afghanistan. Where is this? Yes, Afghanistan. Because, as you know, the World Trade Center, isn't it? How Bin Laden, their supporters hijacked planes and carried out terrorist attacks in USA. अरे पता है कि नहीं है? 9/11, yes. 2001. So, in order to avenge for the attack on American soil, USA invaded Afghanistan along with NATO forces. In other words, USA and its allies controlled the affairs of the world, economy, political, finance, etc., etc. This is also a period of ascendancy of G7. G7 means what? G7 is a group of industrialized nations. We will study about G7 later. G7 is a group of industrialized nations led by USA, UK, Italy, Canada, Japan. Earlier there was this also, France. Earlier there was Russia. But when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, Russia was expelled. Earlier it was G7, then G8, now G7. So G7 is a group of industrialized capitalistic nations, essentially USA and its allies. So G7 controlled the global affairs, international affairs, economic affairs, etc. Their system started reducing its influence since 2010. Now we are going to deal with the fourth phase of international relation. Fourth phase is beginning of multipolarity. Beginning of multipolarity. Beginning of multipolarity. What is multipolarity? Multipolarity is a situation where power is distributed in international system, which essentially mean instead of one or two major superpower, there are multiple powers. But the word is important, beginning of multipolarity. I am not saying that we have reached a situation where there is multipolar world. A multipolar world is one where there is no dominance of one country. Now, why this beginning of multipolarity? Since 2010, This is an ongoing phase, right? It's an ongoing phase. This is an ongoing phase. In other words, contemporary or current phase. Right? Why this is beginning of multipolarity? If multipolarity is beginning, then the power of USA will be reducing. So there is decline of power of USA. So decline USA power. Now why the power of USA is declining? There are some reasons. The first important reason is global financial crisis of 2007 and 8. Global financial crisis, which essentially resulted into what? Undermining the ideology of capitalism and globalization, which resulted into global financial crisis, resulted into what? Recession in USA and other nations. So if your economic financial clout is undermined, reduced, then you cannot control the system. Because the power of purse is an important aspect. So this global financial crisis reduced the economic and financial clout of USA. If this and which are the organizations for controlling the world economic international financial system? IMF, World Bank and WTO. Isn't it? Trade, freedom of trade. So IMF, World Bank and WTO, their control also reduced. Not only that, USA was a superpower and it believed that it can do anything. It invaded Iraq. But instead of stabilizing Iraq, instead of establishing a democratic government, what happened? The invasion of Iraq by USA resulted into large-scale explosion in the region. What is that explosion? That explosion is Islamic State. Islamic State or Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, ISIS. We will study about Islamic State later, don't worry. But for the time being, understand that when USA invaded Iraq, some group of people decided to take up arms against USA. Later, some individual controlled this group of people and they advocated a radical Islamist ideology. They wanted to establish an Islamic State in the West Asia, including Iraq, Syria and etc. So they had started fighting the government which was established by USA in Iraq. Then their fight, their approach, their control extended in other parts of West Asia, including Syria. The war which we see today, the most of the problem which we see in West Asia today, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and other Yemen, and other, even in Afghanistan, if you see, ISIS or Islamic State has become an important institution or an important terrorist organization. The legacy or the history of Islamic State can be traced into the American invasion in Iraq. On the one hand, USA failed to establish democracy because the Iraqi people did not want to import democracy. On the one hand, stability eluded Iraq. Let me ask you one thing. Is Iraq stable? No. Civil war-like situation in Iraq. Civil war-like situation in Syria. No democracy, but violent civil war. The lack of ability of USA to establish a proper democratic regime in Iraq undermined its hegemony or prestige, status. If I claim that I can do something, but if I am not able to do it, what will be my reputation? What will be my prestige? Undermined. A moral defeat of USA in Iraq. Not only that, it resulted into the multi-headed hydra known as Islamic State, which has wreaked havoc in Syria, in Iraq and various other parts of Northern Africa and West Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan and others. Not only that, although they claim Islamic State, their actions are un-Islamic because they preach violence and they also target other sections of Islam, other sects of Islam. This is generally a Sunni dominated Islamic organization. So there are multiple other sects, Shia and others. So a radical approach. But whatever that might be, we'll study about Islamic State later, don't worry. The Islamic State emerged, which has spread terror in international affairs, international system. Not only that, this period also resulted into emergence of emerging market economy, EMEs, emerging market economies like India, Brazil, China and others. And these countries have become regional powers, regional. Within the emerging market economies, China has emerged the most powerful, both economic wise as well as militarily. And China started to act as a counterweight against USA influence. China started to act as a counterweight against USA influence. There has been currency war between China and USA. There has been trade war between USA and China. Currency war means foreign exchange. USA accused China that you are deliberately devaluing your currency. If currency is devalued, then export can be beneficial for the country. But China says, no, we are a free market economy, whatever that might be. So this resulted into tit for tat action. And there is trade war. Trade war means protectionism. Free trade, the USA imposed taxes on Chinese import. Similarly, China also. So whether it is in terms of trade or currency and various other aspects, conflict between China and USA. So China started emerging as a counterweight, a counter-influential country or a counter-hegemonic country vis-a-vis USA. This is also a period where China established this AIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Where is the headquarters? AIBB? Beijing. Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, China led. Now, what is the fundamental idea behind the AIBB? This is an idea that this bank will provide what? Development assistance to developing nations. Earlier, कौन देता था? World Bank, controlled by USA. Now, when that? Not only that, this is also a period of BRICS. We'll study that later. Don't. 2010, BRICS emerged as an institution of emerging market economies and developing nations. And what BRICS wanted? Reformed multilateralism. क्या चाहता है? Reformed multilateralism. Multilateralism means the global affairs or the institutions which carry out global affairs should be reformed. Which are the institutions? United Nations, WTO, World Bank and IMF, etc. should be reformed. Reformed multilateralism. Why? Because these are controlled by USA and others. So BRICS as an organization emerged as the voice of global south. The word global south essentially means global south denotes those nations. Keep writing. Global south denotes those nations which are generally lie in the southern part of hemisphere, which generally lie in the southern part of hemisphere. Like this is the earth, this is the equator. So those global south, ऊपर वाला सब global north. In general, those countries which are lying in southern hemisphere are poor nations, developing nations. In general, outside this southern hemisphere, that is in this northern hemisphere, are developed or industrialized nation. So in general, rich nation, poor nation, developed nation, developing nation, industrialized nation, industrializing nation or agriculture oriented nation. So BRICS emerged as the voice of global south because the international affairs are controlled by global north, these nations, their organization, etc. So BRICS emerged as a grouping, a collectivity to keep the voice of the global south national organization, which means USA and others cannot dictate. Not only that, this is a period of G20. G20, although emerged as an organization in 1999, it became a summit level organization. Summit level means an organization having the head of state or government as the decision makers. So the summit level organization G20, 2008-9, we study about G20, don't worry, very important topic. In fact, everybody knows about G20 in India. Far better than the UPSC aspirants. 1999. But later elevated to summit level in 2008-9. 2008-9. Don't worry, we'll study about G20. So, the emergence of G20. Why did G20 emerged as the summit level? Because the global financial crisis was not able to be contained, managed by the G7. So, G20 was created, as we know today, summit level. Because the containment, management, controlling of the global financial crisis required a global response, and the role of emerging market economies have been very crucial. Are you understanding what I am trying to say? Because the global financial crisis, till then, G7 controlled the economic system, financial system. But crisis happened and they were not able to control. So they required the help of the emerging market economies. So the erstwhile G20, which was only 1999, which was a grouping of finance ministers and governors of central banks, elevated to a summit level. Summit level means the members will be what? The prime ministers and the presidents. So the economic and financial power, or the power to take decisions, with respect to economic and financial affairs of the world shifted from G7 to G20. A transfer of power from G7 to G20. Transfer of power happened from G7 to G20 with respect to decision making on economic and financial system. So if G7 power is limited, then USA power is limited. This one I didn't explain. Continental axial hypothesis. This is not related to this, but anyway, continental axial hypothesis. This hypothesis means that it is because of the geographical location of the countries that they are poor or rich. This hypothesis says it is because of the geographical location. The temperate region nations, temperate region are generally rich because of the climatic condition, geography, climate and others. And the southern, the tropical countries, because of the geography, climate and other aspects, they are poor. Continental axial hypothesis. If at all a question comes in PT, this is the meaning of it. Because of the peculiar, specific geographical location of nations. Because of the peculiar geographical location of these nations, countries can be either rich or poor, developing or developed. Because in tropical nations, we are tropical countries, garmi hai, there are multiple diseases, isn't it? A lot of things are there. Whatever that might be, is a hypothesis. But anyway, this is also a period of deglobalization. There is a talk of deglobalization. 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 Why? Earlier advocated what? Globalization. But because of the globalization, China, India and other countries started benefiting. In the earlier phase of globalization, if you see from 1990 to 2010, this is an earlier phase of globalization you can see if you want. If you want to divide globalization into different phases, then you can phases of globalization. Phases of globalization. Two phases we can divide. 1990s to 2010. We can see 2010 till now. So 2010, before 2010, after 2010. You see this division, this is tentative in the sense that it's not that this is 100% correct, but this is based on analysis, right? This period, first phase of globalization helped who? USA and their allies. First phase of globalization helped USA and their allies. But the second phase of globalization helped, this helped global north. This helped global south. So this second phase is helping global south. India, China, Brazil, South Africa and others, etc., etc. Indonesia and other nations. If it is helping them, then it is not helping them. So the proponents of globalization, the USA and others, started talking about deglobalization. Because the globalization is not benefiting them. So they wanted to remove globalization. How deglobalization? Protectionism. Erecting tariff, barriers. You must have read about in WTO, tariff barrier, non-tariff barrier, etc. What is that? Not psycho. Sanitary measures, psycho-sanitary measures, something like that. Leave it, I'll explain that. Just write sanitary measures, sanitary. Sanitary measures means what? If the product is not made as per hygiene, let's say apple from Himachal Pradesh, transported to USA, globalization, free trade. Now the USA wala is saying the apple is not hygienic. It is made through what? There are pesticides, multiple things, etc., etc. Whatever that might be. The protectionist measures means protecting one's economy. Protectionism can be through multiple aspects. How? Through raising tax. So if tax is higher, import will be less. Yes or no? There are multiple ways of doing it. Tax higher, import will be less. And using quality aspect, hygiene aspect, you can reject the product. So nobody will export then. There are multiple ways of doing it. So protectionism or protectionistic policies have been adopted by the USA and other nations in the context of deglobalization. Protectionist measures being adopted by USA and other nations, especially in the context of Trump, when Trump was the president. Donald Trump was the president till 2020. So he used a lot of protectionist measures because according to him, globalization is not helping America. It is helping who? Other nations. Although globalization, anyway, leave it. leave it. So deglobalization, who talked? Trump and others. Why? Because of the free trade, their economy is being affected. The benefits are being taken by emerging market economies. And because of the economic improvement of these nations, they are investing in military and technology, etc. And because of that, the control of the American power or the control of America on the world system will be diluted. If you have more money, you can become more powerful. You can invest in military. China did that. China used benefit of the globalization, lot of money, so it invested in its military. Not only that, multiple other ways. So this economic benefit should be restricted, diluted. How it can be done? Deglobalization. Protectionism. Undermining the authority of WTO, World Trade Organization. USA tried to hijack the influence or functioning of WTO, World Trade Organization. The functioning of WTO, which is the instrument for enforcing rule-based trade, came to a standstill because of USA. WTO functioning came to a standstill. Write down. It is not necessary that whatever I am speaking should write in that way. Use your language and write. WTO functioning came to a standstill. Why? Protectionism, deglobalization, etc. So in this period, while the West means the global North, USA, Britain, etc., is talking about deglobalization, protectionism, etc. But on the other hand, the East, that is global South, China, India, etc., are talking about what? Talking about globalization. Because the globalization is started benefiting these nations. You must have read about H-1B visa, H-1B. H-1B visa means a visa through which other nationals can enter into USA and work there. So H-1B is a visa for working professionals in USA. So Indians largely, they seek this visa. Globalization also means free movement of people. So visa is given freely. You can go and work there. But more visa means less scope for employment of American. And money will be transmitted to home country. So in order to prevent this, the application or the allocation under H-1B visa is being radically reduced. Give you an example how it is being done. Global South wants more globalization. They want deglobalization or less globalization. In other words, the Global South wants humanized globalization. Globalization with a human face. Globalization with a human face, which essentially means the globalization should be beneficial for all. Write down what the world wants today, or what the Global South wants today, or what India wants today. What is that we want today? Globalization with a human face. Globalization with a human face. In other words, reformed globalization. Or in other words, restructured globalization. Or in other words, redefined globalization. Or in other words, globalization 2.0. Or in other words, free and fair globalization. Why so? Because the first phase helped only who? The West. Now we are being benefited. Now they are saying deglobalization, etc., etc. So no, should follow the principles of globalization. It should not be controlled by one group of people or one institution or a group of institutions. It should be for benefit for all. And the globalization should not lead to inequality in society. Because wherever there is capital or let's say private sector, then the wealth, income level can reduce. Globalization means free movement of capital. Big companies coming to India, so local traders, local people, their income, their work, their vocation, everything will be affected. So it should not lead to that. Free and fair globalization, equitable globalization. Another word, equitable globalization. It may this part of the lecture can help you in GS1 society also. Globalization. Because the talk is about deglobalization. Do we want globalization or deglobalization? We do not want deglobalization. Deglobalization is not in the benefit of anybody. But we require reform in globalization. But in the context of IR, remember, when there is reform or when there is humanized, especially when the globalization is benefiting them, there will be challenges or pushback by the West. That is why one important event took place in 2019 and 20. Brexit. Have you heard about this word? Brexit. Brexit means what? Exit of Britain. Brexit. Brexit. Brexit means exit of Britain. Exit of Britain from what? European Union. Exit of Britain from European Union. Now it is not part. Earlier Britain was part of EU, but later it revoked its membership from European Union. Now whether the Brexit will contribute to globalization or deglobalization? Deglobalization. Because when UK was part of EU, then the trade policies, financial policies of the members will be decided by European Union. Now it has been a different country, different country in the sense that it will have a different independent foreign policy, independent economic policy or financial policy. So the trade between EU members and UK will not be free. There will be barriers, trade, taxes. Earlier free movement of people, of trade, goods, services, globalization. But because of this break, barriers, geographical barrier, trade barrier. So Brexit also resulted into what? This emphasis on deglobalization. Why? UK said that our membership within EU are not benefiting us. Because we are not able to formulate our own independent policy. Workers from other EU member countries are coming to UK and what? And working here, which means that essentially our own people are not able to work properly. What are that? There are multiple reasons for that. But the point is that this Brexit and exit of Britain from EU has also undermined the importance of globalization. Because globalization essentially deals with freedom of movement and trade. So the geographical barriers are irrelevant. But when you move out of an organization and start an independent foreign policy or independent economic policy, then essentially you are undermining the very idea of globalization. Globalization, capitalism, USA, UK, France and others, globalization, capitalism. But now one of the most important proponent of globalization, UK, moved out of EU. So the ideological superiority, write down, the ideological superiority or supremacy of capitalism has been undermined due to Brexit and America First policy of Trump. America First policy of Trump. America First policy of Trump. America First policy means protectionist policy taken by Trump administration. So this ideological superiority is undermined, which means you are the moral force, and the prestige and status in world affairs is also undermined. You are saying that capitalism is the best one. So you should follow, you should implement these policies. We are telling you, because we are capitalist nations and we are following capitalistic system of economy. You should follow. Why you should follow? This is the best. You see ours, we are developed nations, we are industrialized. We have all the comfort, luxuries, etc. But now what they are saying? Now they are taking such actions and decisions which are undermining it. So they cannot use ideology as a force to control others. Isn't it? What is the influence of ideology on humans? What is the meaning of ideology? A set of beliefs which guide the human action or human behavior. Ideology can be religious, ideology can be political, anything it can be. A set of beliefs. Communism is an ideology, capitalism is an ideology. You must have read about left-wing ideology, right-wing ideology. So ideology can influence people. Ideology can govern the behavior of people. Ideology can control the behavior of people. So if a nation advocates an ideology which seems to be appealing for others, they will accept it. Why do you think LPG, liberalization, practicing globalization, whatever that might be, there are other motives also, but still the government felt compelled to use that ideology of capitalism. Why the government of India uses privatization? There is a phrase in government of India today, minimum government, maximum governance. What is minimum government? Government role in the economy, society and others will be very much limited. Who will have more role? Private sector. What is the idea? Capitalism. So ideology can govern domestic policy, foreign policy. So ideology should be such that it should be, ideology can influence you. So capitalism of the ideology, globalization of the ideology, which influence other nations, which enable you to control them. Isn't it? If you influence somebody, you can control them. But now what you are saying, that We are adopting such policies which are against globalization. In effect, what you are saying, your ideology is not superior. Are you understanding what I am trying to say? I am simply saying that ideology of capitalism was used by the USA and other nations to control, dictate policies in other nations. But because of the global financial crisis and resultant protectionist policy, Brexit, etc., resulted into undermining the prestige of that ideology. It meant that capitalism is not the superior ideology because it failed. If ideologies failed, then nations will take to other approaches, isn't it? Hence, the force, the control, the influence or dominance of USA also undermined.
Sir, Brexit of UK.
हाँ
आपने बोला कि कैपिटलिज्म को अंडरमाइन करता है.
हाँ बिल्कुल करता है.
तो वो तो कैपिटलिज्म को ही फॉलो करता है ना, यूके भी तो.
Capitalism requires free trade. Free trade. UK was part of EU. UK was part of European Union.
Just because of lacking of free trade तभी तो वो अलग हुआ ना, क्योंकि free trade के लिए.
Free trade means freedom of trade between nations, not within. Free trade means freedom of trade within nations, freedom of trade in the international system, freedom of trade through ocean. You must have read about South China Sea. China is controlling South China Sea, right? Which means the ships and boats, etc., they cannot freely move. Freedom of trade in international trade, freedom of international trade, to make it more precise, freedom of international trade. This will happen in globalization because the borders will be irrelevant. Taxation control, custom control will be very less. GST in India. Now from one state to another state, you can move freely, goods can move freely. Earlier it was not the case. Earlier within the border, the goods, the consignment, the lorries, etc. have to what? Keep waiting for a long time. So freedom of trade was restricted then, pre-GST. In GST, freedom of trade. UK in EU. This is EU. Multiple countries. Free trade, free trade, free trade, free trade, no problem. Now what happened? This is UK. This is European Union. Multiple countries. Freedom of trade. No problem. Right? Now, this is EU, this is UK. There is a barrier here. Geographical border, custom, tax, restriction, isn't it? Visa, passport, all these things are required. So will there be freedom of trade? The freedom of trade which was there in EU will not be there. Yes or no? Freedom of trade is the essence of globalization. Freedom of international trade. Essence of globalization. Globalization was based on ideology of capitalism. So all this capitalism, globalization became the ideological control on the nations. If you can control somebody, then they will obey you. But here, you are taking steps, actions against globalization. Brexit, America First, and others, which undermined the superiority of your ideology. If capitalism is superior, then why are you talking about deglobalization? Why are you taking protectionist measures? Dilution of ideological superiority also resulted into moral defeat of USA. In other words, undermining dilution in ideological superiority of capitalism resulted into reduction of influence and undermining the ideological superiority. This is something which you have written already I think. Ideological superiority of capitalism resulted into dilution of the control of global north stroke USA in the international system. In the international system. In the international system. In other words, all the above developments resulted into significant erosion of unipolarity, stroke dominance of USA. Full stop. Consequently, today the global order is experiencing a movement towards multipolarity. This is very important to know. What is that? We are not living in a bipolar world. China and USA are not the earlier bipolarity of their Russia, the USSR and USA. Now we are saying that China has emerged as a counterweight. But China did not replace Russia in the sense that the bipolar world which existed between end of Second World War and end of Cold War, this bipolarity we cannot see today. Right? On the one hand, the hegemony or the control of USA is declining and China is also emerging as a counterweight. But it does not mean that China and USA control the world system. No. It does not mean that there are two powers, superpowers, USA and China, which are controlling the world, international affairs. No. But we can say that at the international level today, USA and China have more power and control than others. But the world is not bipolar the way it was there in that Cold War period. Because there are multiple nations like India, Brazil, South Africa and Indonesia and others who have emerged as significant economic and military power. And there are also institutions, regional level institutions, global institutions, etc., which are also exercise some control. I am saying that the world is not a bipolar world. The world is not a multipolar world. The world is moving towards multipolarity. But one important thing has to be taken into consideration. Write down. Although the world is moving towards multipolarity, recent events have reduced the pace of such movement. For example, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Number 2. Israel-Hamas war Number 3, re-emergence of a different combination of bloc politics. Re-emergence of a different combination of bloc politics. One led by USA and another led by China. The bloc led by USA is very easy to see. UK with USA, France with USA, Canada with USA, New Zealand with USA, Australia with USA. Most of the European nations are with USA. There are some Asian nations also, Philippines, etc. Philippines, Vietnam. You don't have to remember these things, but understand the process which is going on. Another bloc which is being led by China. Russia is a part of that. Iran is a part of that. Myanmar is a part of that. North Korea is a part of that. Venezuela is a part of that. Venezuela. Cuba is a part of that. France, UK, this is you already know, Canada and others, etc. What I am trying to say, re-emergence. The bloc politics we saw in Cold War, USSR, NATO, etc. Scandinavian nations. Bloc politics we saw in USSR and USA. But Cold War ended, USSR disintegrated. The world was moving towards this multipolarity. But suddenly Russia invaded Ukraine. This invasion has undermined what? Undermined the territorial integrity, sovereignty of nation. It also divided the world into two, one supporting Russia and another supporting Ukraine. This is still going on. In multipolarity, multiple powers are there. In multipolarity, territorial integrity of nations, sovereignty will be respected. After the Second World War, in Europe, a security architecture was established, which means, let me ask you one thing. After Second World War, was there a war prior to the Ukraine war in Europe? No, not to this level. Second World War ended in 1945. After that, no large-scale war or no war has happened in Europe. This system was undermined by invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And because of this, what happened? Countries again started taking sides, bipolarity. Right? Not only that, because of this, NATO started expanding. Those nations which are having borders with Russia, like Finland, decided to become part of NATO. NATO Security Organization, NATO Cold War, USA. Now countries are joining NATO. Why? Because they feel threatened because of Russia. Sweden is going to be joined. So now what is happening is that countries are taking sides. USA, France, all these there, but other countries are also being part of this NATO Security Alliance because of the war. bipolarity. Now Russia, China has used this war. China has started helping Russia. So Russian invasion of Ukraine deepened the friendship relation between China and Russia. China and Russia signed no limits partnership agreement. No limits partnership. No limits partnership between China and Russia. Simply meaning that Chinese interests are against USA, remember. Now Russia attacked, so China, Russia came together. Not only that, there are multiple other nations in the world which do not like USA. Like Iran, like North Korea, like Venezuela and others. So they also started having closer engagement, relation with who? With China and Russia. So this is a bloc which is emerging. A bloc led by China is emerging and the USA bloc is also being strengthened, which essentially means re-emergence of bipolarity, beginning of re-emergence. So when there is this re-emergence, then multipolarity will be diluted. Are you understand what I am trying to say?
So what is the consequences of bipolarity?
Consequence of bipolarity. Number one consequence is that the nation states or the states will lose their independence of foreign policy. They will become satellite state. Satellite state, independent foreign policy will be violated. Sovereignty will be violated. They will be controlled by other nations. The interest of the bloc leaders will determine the domestic and foreign policy of the nations. And it is not necessary that always their interest is my interest. I become subordinate to them. I will be controlled by them.
That's what is happening now.
It happened in Cold War period. It can happen now because this is a movement. We are not saying that it has reached to that level. But these developments have accelerated that bipolarity. These developments, Ukraine, Russia, China and others, these developments have resulted into accelerating this, accelerated the pace of bipolarity, undermined the movement towards multipolarity. These developments have raised the fear, let me put it this way, the development which we just wrote, these developments have raised concerns of returning to a bipolar world order. Now it's fine. Have a concern raised that are we going back to a bipolar world? Because the world requires multipolarity. When the world is unipolar and bipolar, then sovereignty, integrity, independence of nations will be a myth. States will become satellite states. The big states will control the poor, weaker states, which means they cannot develop, they cannot grow. Bipolarity undermines Westphalian world order. Bipolarity will undermine Westphalia. So this is an ongoing phase, right? Whatever we discuss further will be in this context, this ongoing phase of international relation, India's foreign policy, India, other nation bilateral relation, international institutions, India and the world, etc., all will be in this context. As far as this introduction is concerned, there are a few other things. One is schools of IR, realism and idealism, which I will teach in the next class. And after that, we will study, we will write about or we will learn about some concepts, diplomacy, realpolitik, power, and realism, and let's say strategic autonomy, right, hard power, soft power, etc. These are minor. But today I want to tell you, I will take 15 more minutes. How many of you have class at 2 o'clock, 2, 3, 2:30? Are you having any classes? At what time? सेल्फ स्टडी का है ना, कोई बात नहीं, सेल्फ स्टडी. You can leave some pages if you want, because in the first first lecture, that is Introduction to IR, we studied two important things. One, what is IR, and origin and evolution. There are two other topics left under this. One is schools of IR. School means some theories. Two important theories are there. That's one. After that, we'll write some concepts. This concept can be written later also, not a problem. If you want, you can leave some pages, 1 or 2 pages for realism and idealism, which I will teach you next class. But today, I want to start Introduction to Foreign Policy. This is the topic, isn't it? This one. Evolution of India's foreign policy. Evolution of India's foreign policy. Evolution of India's foreign policy. Foreign policy we discussed. Foreign policy mean a set of principles, interests or norms which guide external affairs. Right? Evolution of India's foreign policy. So, India became a nation state or a state, independent nation only after 1947. So, we will study India's foreign policy from 1947. So, we will study this evolution of India's foreign policy or India's foreign policy under the following heading. What are they? Number 1. I will put it here. Number 1. Objectives of India's foreign policy. Objectives. Number 2. Principles of India's foreign policy. Principles. Number 3. Determinants of India's foreign policy. Determinants. Number 4. Challenges and achievements, challenges and future of India's foreign policy. Then we will study phases of India's foreign policy. Objective of Indian foreign policy. What is the objective? Objective means what? Aim, goal. Every policy will have an objective or will have a set of objectives, multiple objectives. Health policy, education policy. Similarly, foreign policy. What are the objectives of objective foreign policy? A. Safeguarding territorial integrity. Safeguarding territorial integrity. Very easy. These are self-explanatory. Safeguarding territorial integrity. So the integrity of the nation has to be safeguarded. One of the objective of Indian foreign policy is what? Safeguarding, maintaining, right, of integrity of the territory, integrity of the nation. This can be through diplomacy, this can be through war, multiple mechanisms can be there. Isn't it? Safeguarding territorial integrity. So whatever foreign policy, whatever methods we use, whatever steps we take under the foreign policy, one aim is that it should be able to protect, safeguard the territorial integrity of the nation. Next is comprehensive national development. Comprehensive national development, very easy. Social development, political development, economic development, demographic development. So, comprehensive national development. That is why we enter into multiple what? Trade agreements, FTA, Prime Minister goes to the country and asks them to invest in this country, etc., etc. Comprehensive national development. Education, health, whatever that might be, comprehensive national development. Yes or no? Next. Next is international peace and security. International peace and security. One of the objectives of India's foreign policy is to maintain, establish peace and security at the international level. Our foreign policy is based on so-called Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. World is one family. But not India. But anyway, world is one family. Indians are also family, don't worry. World is one family. If world is one family, which means there should be peace and security. Otherwise, there cannot be any family feeling. So, one of the objectives of India's foreign policy is international peace and security. So, India, whatever steps India take at the external level is oriented towards establishing, maintaining peace and security. So, India will not support war. India always say peaceful resolution of dispute. Peaceful resolution of disputes. Then only if there are disputes should be resolved through peace, dialogue, discussion, not war, not conflict, not attack. Another objective is independence of foreign policy. One of the objectives of India's foreign policy is to maintain independence of foreign policy. In other words, you can say strategic autonomy. Maintaining independence of foreign policy. It might be possible that our foreign policy might be influenced by other nations. So, we do not want to be influenced, controlled by them. So, one of the objectives is that we should conduct our foreign policy, we should implement our foreign policy, we should formulate our foreign policy in a manner that we have independence and control over that. Other countries should not dictate. We want aid from one country. So, we take aid from them. When we should ensure that they should not dictate our foreign policy. You can get aid through foreign policy, international relation, but the aid should not be such that they will control your foreign policy. Your relation with other nations should not be such that they will dictate your policies. Are you getting independence of foreign policy? In other words, strategic autonomy. So, one of the objectives of India's foreign policy is to maintain strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy means the capacity to take relatively independent decision with respect to external affairs. Independently, the capacity to take relatively independent decisions. Relatively independent decisions with respect to external affairs. For protecting and promoting national interest. For protecting and promoting national interest. Principles of foreign policy. What are the principles of foreign policy? Number 1. I'll write here. Principle of foreign policy. Principles. What is the meaning of principle? Principle is a guide to action. Principle is a guide to human behavior. Principle, a norm which controls or influences your behavior. If a civil servant's principle is public interest, public service, then he or she will work for that. If the principle behind joining civil service is power or money, then there can be abuse of power, corruption. Isn't it? Principle. Principle means that which guides you. That which guides you. That which influences your behavior. Principle of India's foreign policy. What are the principles of India's foreign policy? Which means those guides, those norms or those factors which guide your foreign policy. What are they? Number 1 is non-alignment. Number 2, Panchsheel. Number 3, disarmament. Number 4, anti-racism. Number 5, anti-imperialism. What happened? Disarmament. Disarmament. Anti-racism. Anti-imperialism. Non-alignment. Panchsheel. Disarmament. Anti-racism. Anti-racism. Anti-imperialism. Another one is Afro-Asian bias. Afro-Asian bias. Another one is Afro-Asian bias. African. Afro-Asian bias. Another one is BCDEFG. Support to UN. Support to United Nations. Support to United Nations. Another one is peaceful resolution of disputes. I'll explain briefly. Resolution of disputes. Resolution of disputes. Peaceful resolution of disputes. Non-alignment, which we'll study later elaborately, but for the time being, understand what is non-alignment? Not aligning with any of the power bloc. Although it was a Cold War period, but still it is relevant today. Right? For foreign policy principle, if one principle is non-alignment. Our approach, foreign policy will not be aligned with somebody, or this will not be against this or for that. We will have an independent foreign policy. Non-alignment. Panchsheel. Panchsheel means it's an agreement which India signed with Tibetan region of China in 1954. Panchsheel. Panchsheel. Panch. P-A-N-C-H. Panchsheel mean what? 5 principles of coexistence. P-A-N-C-H. Panchsheel. S-H-E-E-L. Panchsheel. 5 principles of coexistence which India signed with Tibetan region of China in 1954. This Panchsheel provided a framework for India-China bilateral relations. India-China bilateral relations. 5 pillars of Panchsheel are, number 1. Panchsheel means 5 pillars. What are the 5? Number 1. Mutual recognition of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Mutual recognition of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Next, mutual non-intervention. Next, mutual non-aggression. Next, mutual cooperation. And equality. Mutual cooperation and equality. Very easy to remember. Mutual. सब में mutual है. All 4. Mutual recognition of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Mutual non-intervention. Non-intervention. I told non-intervention, but I did not write non-intervention. If it is mutual intervention, then there is no need for this principle, isn't it? Mutual non-intervention. Mutual non-aggression. mutual cooperation and equality. Next is peaceful resolution of disputes. Peaceful resolution of disputes. Peaceful resolution of disputes. Punchil. Disarmament, very easy. Disarmament is what? Reduction or elimination of dangerous weapons. Reduction or elimination of dangerous weapons. Disarmament. Reduction, not protection. Reduction or elimination of dangerous weapons, including WMDs, nuclear weapons, etc. India has been a strong advocate. India has been a strong advocate for stronger global disarmament regime. Stronger global disarmament regime. We'll study disarmament later, don't worry. Anti-racism, very easy. Racism, the British claimed that they are a superior race and Indians are inferior race. Racism is against equality of human beings. Racism means superiority of one human race over the other. Like Hitler, like the British. Superior race. But India's foreign policy, our principle is that all humans are human race. There are no different races in human. And we do not discriminate black, white, Negroes, Americans, etc. No. Anti-racism. Clear? Anti-imperialism. Imperialism means what? Imperialism is an ideology. Imperialism is an ideology which emphasizes on what? Acquisition of territory. Acquisition of territory. Acquisition. Acquire, acquisition. Acquisition of territory. Expanding territory. Controlling other nations. Afro-Asian bias, very easy. Afro-Asian bias means what? In our foreign policy, we will have more preference towards African and Asian nations. Why? Because Africa and Asia have been under the control of the colonialism. So, historical reasons. So, our foreign policy is biased towards, positively biased towards, preference towards Africa and Asia. You must have heard about this slogan, Hindi Chini bhai bhai. Why? Both are Asian, bhai bhai. Should be bahan also. I don't know. Whatever that might be. So the point is that Africa and Asia, Afro-Asian bias, we study in the context of India-Africa relation. In fact, Nehru categorically said, Indian independence is incomplete without Africa's independence. Indian independence is incomplete without Africa's independence. That is why India has taken multiple steps for independence, decolonization of African nations, including South Africa, including multiple Asian nations. Afro-Asian bias. Why? Because the problems plus history of Africa and Asia are similar. Problem plus history, similar. Problem, history, similar. Hence, way forward is also similar. Way forward, similar. which means problems are similar. Poverty, you will find in Africa and Asia. India also we have. Developmental problems, almost similar. Agriculture, lack of development of industry, similar. Historical, similar. Colonialism, etc. Because problem and history are similar, approach to tackle them can also be similar. Afro-Asian based. Last one, support to UN, very easy. India always wants that the United Nations should be the institution through which international affairs are conducted. Conflicts are addressed. Norms of governance are set. UN, United Nations, should be the institution through which the global affairs are conducted. Global affairs, whether security, whether dispute between nations, whatever that might be. So we always want that UN should be the centrality. UN should be the centrality or core of global system of governance. Support to UN. Israel, Gaza, India says UN should be the institution. Ukraine, Russia, UN should be the institution. UN. Last one, peaceful resolution dispute. This is very easy. India wants peaceful resolution dispute. ठीक है? और क्या बच गया? Determinant. That will leave it tomorrow. But tomorrow next class, right? Determinants and this achievement and some part of which are left. And after that we will study bilateral relation, India and Pakistan. Next Saturday.
Sir, like India, Palestine को recognize नहीं करता है, क्योंकि जो इंडिया का जो अपन लोग वर्ल्ड का जो मैप पढ़ते हैं उसमें पैलेस्टीन नहीं है, हमारे कंट्री में
Palestine, India recognizes Palestine.
बट मैप में नहीं शो.
No, the point is, see, India's approach to Palestine is that it was India who allowed the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, to open its office in India. At the international level, Palestine is not an independent country. Right? It has not recognized as such by the UN. But India wants that there should be two independent nations. One is Israel and Palestine. India always support that Palestine should be a state, having government, having territory, having population, and Israel and Palestine should live together, work together, and exist together. We have recognized Palestine, but the point is that Palestine is not a nation as such, which has, right, as a member of the United Nations. India recognizes Palestine. India supports Palestine. India supports Israel also. We want two-state solution. Two-state mean Israel state and Palestine state. But the point is that because of the domestic convulsions and because of the political party in power and the ideology of the government, our approach towards Palestine question keep on changing. Anything else? You will understand. Keep reading newspaper, and lot of things will become clear to you once we end the class. End the class means when this batch get over, your understanding about IR will be what? Widened, strengthened, improved, and cleared. You will have clarity. Anything else you want to ask? No. Revise your notes properly. Thank you so much.